The crack of a belt against her back made Hannah Matthews bite down so hard she tasted copper. But she refused to cry out even as her stepfather's shadow loomed over the fresh mound of earth that held her mother's body. She was 21 years old, standing at her own mother's grave in the late afternoon heat of Sloan, Nevada, and tears streaked down her dust-covered cheeks as her stepfather Vernon raised his hand again, spitting words about weakness and shame while the small gathering of mourners looked away in practiced silence. It was May of 1882, and the desert sun beat down mercilessly on the makeshift cemetery at the edge of town, where wooden crosses jutted from the hardpan like broken teeth. Crying like some useless child, Vernon snarled, his breath reeking of whiskey even at 3 in the afternoon. Your mother's dead and gone, and all you can do is stand here bawling like it matters. Hannah's shoulders shook as she tried to suppress the sobs, but they came anyway, raw and desperate. Her mother had been the only person in the world who loved her, who saw her as something more than a burden or a commodity to be traded. 3 days of pneumonia had taken her, and now Hannah stood alone in a world that felt impossibly vast and cold despite the Nevada heat. The belt came down again, and this time she stumbled forward, her black mourning dress catching on the rough wooden cross that marked her mother's resting place. Her knees hit the ground hard enough to send shock waves up her legs, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the gaping wound in her chest where her heart used to be. That's enough. The voice was quiet, but carried a weight that made Vernon pause mid-swing. Hannah looked up through her tears to see a tall man in a dusty brown coat and worn leather chaps stepping forward from where he'd been standing near his horse at the edge of the cemetery. His hat cast his face in shadow, but she could see the set of his jaw, the tension in his broad shoulders. "This ain't your business, stranger," Vernon growled, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. The man who'd spoken was younger than Vernon, probably no more than 24 or 25, but he moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew how to handle himself. "I'm making it my business," the stranger said, and now Hannah could see his eyes, steel gray and unflinching. "A woman's got a right to mourn her mother without being beaten for it." Vernon's face turned red, the veins in his neck bulging. "This is my stepdaughter, and I'll discipline her how I see fit." "She's a grown woman at a funeral," the stranger replied, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. Not threatening exactly, but the message was clear. "And you're drunk and making a spectacle. Go home and sleep it off." For a long moment, the cemetery was silent except for the whistle of wind through the Joshua trees. Hannah held her breath, waiting for Vernon to explode, to turn his rage on this stranger who dared to intervene. But something in the younger man's steady gaze must have penetrated even Vernon's whiskey-soaked fury, because he lowered the belt with a curse. "This ain't over," Vernon muttered, pointing a thick finger at Hannah. "You got until sundown to get home and fix supper. If you're not there, you'll wish you were in the ground with her." He stalked away toward his wagon, and the few remaining mourners scattered like tumbleweeds, eager to be gone before any more unpleasantness could unfold. Hannah stayed on her knees beside her mother's grave, her whole body trembling with the effort of holding herself together. The stranger stood quietly nearby, not approaching but not leaving either, and something about his patient presence made the dam break completely. The sobs came harder now, great heaving gasps that shook her entire frame. She pressed her hands to her face, ashamed of her weakness but unable to stop the flood of grief that had been building since her mother drew her last rattling breath 3 nights ago. She'd sat beside that bed, holding her mother's hand, listening to promises that everything would be all right even though they both knew it was a lie. Her mother had been the only good thing in Hannah's life since her real father died when she was 12, before her mother married Vernon 2 years later in a desperate attempt to keep food on the table. "Madam." The word was gentle, barely more than a murmur, and Hannah looked up to find the stranger crouched beside her, his gray eyes soft with something that might have been understanding. He'd removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar, and his sun-weathered face was kind. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said simply. "A mother's love is a precious thing." Something about the way he said it, the genuine sorrow in his voice, made Hannah's chest constrict even tighter. "I don't know what to do," she heard herself whisper. "She was all I had." The stranger was quiet for a moment, then did something unexpected. He shifted to sit in the dirt beside her, right there next to the fresh grave, and opened his arms in a gesture of offering. "Sometimes crying's all we can do," he said. "And sometimes we need a shoulder to cry on. I don't mind lending mine if it would help." Hannah stared at him, this stranger who'd stepped between her and Vernon's belt, who sat with her in the dust beside her mother's grave like it was the most natural thing in the world. She should have been suspicious, should have wondered what he wanted in return, but all she could see in his face was honest compassion. She leaned against him, hesitant at first, and when his arm came around her shoulders, solid and steady, she finally let herself truly weep. She cried for her mother, for the unfairness of a life that had been nothing but hardship, for the terror of facing the future alone under Vernon's roof. She cried for all the things she'd never said and all the moments they'd never have. The stranger held her through it all, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, not speaking, just being there in a way that no one had been for her in longer than she could remember. Time seemed to suspend itself in that dusty cemetery. The sun crept lower toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and gradually Hannah's tears slowed. She became aware of how improper this must look, her leaning against a strange man in public, but when she started to pull away, his voice stopped her. "Take your time," he said. "Grief doesn't run on a schedule." "I don't even know your name," Hannah said, her voice rough from crying. "Cole Young," he replied. "I'm a ranch hand over at the Double J spread about 15 miles north of here. Came into town for supplies and heard about the funeral. Figured I'd pay respects even though I didn't know your mother. My own ma died 5 years back and I remember how it felt." "I'm Hannah Matthews," she said, finally sitting up and wiping at her face with her sleeve. "And I'm sorry I fell apart on you like that." "Nothing to apologize for," Cole said firmly. "Your stepfather now, he's got plenty to apologize for, but you don't." Hannah glanced nervously in the direction Vernon had gone. "I should get back. He meant what he said about sundown." Cole's jaw tightened. "Does he hit you often?" The question was blunt, and Hannah's first instinct was to deny it to protect the family secrets like her mother had always done. But her mother was gone now, and the welts on her back throbbed with every breath. "Often enough," she said quietly. "You got anywhere else you could go? Family, friends?" Hannah shook her head. "My mother was all the family I had. Vernon married her for her little bit of land, and when she got sick, he made it clear I'd be working off her medical debts for the foreseeable future. If I run, he'll come after me. He's not a man to let things go." Cole was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes distant as he thought. Finally, he stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, let's get you on your feet at least." Hannah took his hand, feeling the calluses from years of hard work, the strength in his grip as he pulled her up. She swayed slightly, dizzy from crying and from not having eaten since yesterday, and Cole steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" he asked, frowning. "I've been busy," Hannah said, which wasn't really an answer. Cole looked at the sky, judging the time, then made a decision. The saloon serves a decent stew. Let me buy you supper before you head back. I couldn't, Hannah protested. Vernon said sundown. Sundown's still an hour off, Cole said, and you'll be no good to anyone if you faint from hunger. Besides, he's probably passed out drunk by now anyway. There was logic in that. Vernon had been drinking since dawn, and he usually collapsed into a stupor by late afternoon when he really got into the bottle. Hannah's stomach growled traitorously at the mention of food, and she found herself nodding before she could think better of it. They walked together through the dusty streets of Sloane, Cole leading his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with patient eyes. The town was small, maybe 300 souls at most, built up around a water stop on the railroad line that ran through southern Nevada. Most of the buildings were simple wooden structures, weathered by the harsh desert sun, and the main street was packed dirt that turned to dust whenever the wind kicked up. The saloon was called the Silver Dollar, and it was relatively quiet at this hour, before the evening crowd rolled in. Cole tied his horse to the hitching post and held the door open for Hannah, who felt suddenly self-conscious about her tear-stained face and dusty morning dress. But the bartender, a thick-necked man with a graying beard, simply nodded at them and gestured to an empty table near the window. 2 bowls of stew, please, Cole said, and some bread if you've got it. They sat across from each other at the scarred wooden table, and Hannah kept her eyes down, unsure what to say. Cole seemed comfortable with the silence, though, and when the food came, he pushed one of the bowls toward her with a gentle, "Eat." The stew was simple, beef and vegetables in a rich brown broth, but it was the best thing Hannah had tasted in days. She tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but her body had other ideas. She was halfway through the bowl before she realized Cole had barely touched his own, and she looked up to find him watching her with a small smile. "Go ahead and finish mine too if you want," he said. "I had a big lunch." Hannah doubted that was true, but she was too hungry to argue much. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for stopping Vernon, for sitting with me for this. You didn't have to." "Maybe not," Cole agreed, "but my ma raised me to help folks when I can. And I couldn't just stand by and watch a man beat a woman at her mother's funeral." "Most people did," Hannah said, the bitterness creeping into her voice before she could stop it. "Most people are scared of Vernon Matthews," Cole said. "He's got a reputation for being mean when he's drunk, and drunk is his natural state these days, from what I've heard." "You're not scared of him," Cole shrugged. "I've dealt with mean drunks before, and I don't take kindly to bullies." They were quiet for a moment, and then Hannah asked, "You said your mother passed 5 years ago." Something flickered across Cole's face, an old grief that had scarred over but never fully healed. "Fever took her and my little sister too. I was 19, working on a ranch in Colorado. By the time I got the telegram and made it home, they were already buried. My pa died in the war when I was just a kid, so losing them meant I was alone. I know what that feels like." "I'm sorry," Hannah said, and meant it. "Life's hard out here," Cole said simply, "but we keep going anyway." "That's what my ma would have wanted, and I reckon that's what yours would want too." Hannah thought about her mother, about the quiet strength she'd shown even in her final days, the way she'd made Hannah promise to be brave and find her own happiness somehow. "She wanted me to leave," Hannah admitted. "Before she died, she told me to run to get away from Vernon, but I don't have any money and I don't know where I'd go." Cole leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "The Double J is always looking for help. Mrs. Jennings, the owner's wife, she's been wanting someone to help with the cooking and the housework. Her arthritis has been getting bad. It's honest work and it comes with room and board in the bunkhouse area. If you're interested, I could put in a word." Hope flared in Hannah's chest, bright and painful. "You really think they'd hire me? Can you cook?" "Yes, and clean, and mend clothes, and tend a garden. My mother taught me." "Then I don't see why not," Cole said. "Course, Vernon might not take kindly to you leaving." The hope dimmed as quickly as it had come. "He'll say I owe him for my mother's care. He'll make trouble." "Then maybe we don't give him the chance," Cole said slowly, an idea clearly forming. "My boss, Mr. Jennings, he's a fair man, but he's also not someone folks cross lightly. If you come out to the ranch with me tonight, tell him your situation. He might be willing to hire you on the spot. Once you're working for the Double J, Vernon would have to go through Mr. Jennings to get to you, and I don't think he's got the guts for that. Tonight." Hannah's heart was racing now, fear and excitement warring inside her. "Why not? You said yourself Vernon's probably passed out by now. You could grab whatever you need and be gone before he wakes up. By the time he realizes you're not coming back, you'll be safely at the ranch." It was reckless, impulsive, everything Hannah had been taught not to be. But as she sat there in the dim saloon with this kind stranger who'd shown her more compassion in an hour than Vernon had in 9 years, she felt something shift inside her. Her mother had told her to be brave, to find her own path. Maybe this was it. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Let's do it." Cole's face broke into a genuine smile, and Hannah felt her breath catch. He was handsome when he smiled, she realized, in a rough, weathered way. "Finish your stew," he said. "Then we'll go get your things." They rode out to Vernon's homestead as the sun touched the horizon, painting the desert in shades of red and purple. Hannah sat behind Cole on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. The property was small, just a few acres with a run-down house and a barn that leaned dangerously to one side. Vernon's wagon was parked crookedly near the front door, and sure enough, when Hannah crept inside, she found him sprawled on the sofa, snoring wetly. Her hands shook as she gathered her few belongings. 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a small jewelry box with her grandmother's wedding ring inside, and a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. Everything fit into a single canvas bag, which was somehow more depressing than anything else about her life here. 9 years, and she could pack up and leave in 5 minutes. She paused at the door of her mother's room, the grief rushing back in a wave. The bed was still unmade from where her mother had died, and the room still smelled faintly of sickness and lavender water. Hannah stepped inside, pressed her hand to the pillow, and whispered a goodbye. Then she turned and walked out, closing the door on that part of her life forever. Cole was waiting outside, keeping watch, and when he saw her, he took her bag and tied it to his saddle. All set, Hannah confirmed and surprised herself by meaning it. They rode north as the stars came out, the horses, hooves kicking up small clouds of dust that glowed in the moonlight. Hannah had never been more than a few miles from Sloan in her entire life, and the vast openness of the desert at night was both terrifying and exhilarating. Cole pointed out constellations as they rode, his voice a low rumble that she could feel through his back, and gradually, Hannah felt the knot of tension in her chest begin to ease. The Double J Ranch was larger than Hannah had expected, with a sprawling main house, several outbuildings and corrals that held dozens of horses. Cole led her to the main house, where warm light spilled from the windows and helped her down from the horse with careful hands. "Wait here," he said. "I'll go talk to Mr. Jennings first." Hannah stood in the yard, clutching her bag, trying not to think about what she'd do if this didn't work out. She'd burned her bridges now. There was no going back to Vernon's house. Cole emerged a few minutes later with an older couple. The man was stocky and weathered, with shrewd blue eyes and a thick mustache, and the woman was small and round, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and a face that spoke of kindness. "Miss Matthews," Mr. Jennings said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Cole tells me you're looking for work." "Yes, sir," Hannah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I can cook and clean and do laundry. I'm a hard worker, I promise." Mrs. Jennings stepped closer, her eyes taking in Hannah's mourning dress, the tear-stained face, the way she held herself like someone expecting a blow. "Cole told us about your mother," she said gently. "I'm very sorry for your loss, dear." "Thank you, madam." "He also told us about your stepfather," Mr. Jennings added. "I want you to know that if you work for us, you're under our protection. Vernon Matthews sets foot on this property making trouble, he'll answer to me." "Understood." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different from the ones she'd cried at the cemetery. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." "Now about the work," Mrs. Jennings said. "My hands aren't what they used to be, and running a household this size is getting to be too much. I need someone to help with the cooking, the cleaning, the mending, all of that. Room and board included, plus $15 a month. Does that sound fair?" $15 a month was more than Hannah had ever had in her life. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Good," Mrs. Jennings said, smiling. "Come on, dear. Let me show you to your room. You look exhausted." The room was small but clean, with a real bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the corrals. To Hannah, who'd spent the last 9 years sleeping in a drafty attic, it looked like a palace. Mrs. Jennings brought her fresh water and a towel, showed her where the privy was, and promised they'd talk more in the morning about her duties. When Hannah was finally alone, she sat on the edge of the bed and just breathed. The day had been impossibly long, impossibly strange. She'd buried her mother, been beaten by her stepfather, cried on a stranger's shoulder, and run away to start a new life, all in the space of about 6 hours. It didn't seem real. But when she lay down on the soft mattress and pulled the clean quilt up to her chin, feeling safer than she had in years, she knew it was real. And for the first time since her mother got sick, she let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right. Hannah woke before dawn the next morning, habit from years of Vernon's demands already pulling her from sleep. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was, and then memory rushed back. The ranch, Cole, her new life. She dressed quickly in one of her plain work dresses and made her way to the main house, where she found Mrs. Jennings already in the kitchen, moving slowly as she tried to start breakfast. "Oh, good morning, dear," Mrs. Jennings said, looking relieved. "I was hoping you'd be up early, but I didn't want to wake you after yesterday." "I'm used to early mornings," Hannah said. "What can I do to help?" They fell into an easy rhythm, Mrs. Jennings directing while Hannah did the heavier work. The ranch employed about a dozen men, all of whom needed to be fed before they headed out for the day's work, and Hannah threw herself into the task with determination. She made biscuits and gravy, fried eggs and bacon, and brewed strong coffee that could wake the dead. The ranch hands filed in as the sun rose, tired and hungry, and Hannah served them with quiet efficiency. Cole was among them, and when their eyes met across the crowded kitchen, he gave her a small nod and a smile that made her stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. After breakfast, after the men had ridden out and the dishes were washed and put away, Mrs. Jennings sat Hannah down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. "You did well this morning," she said. "Better than well, actually. Where did you learn to make biscuits that light?" "My mother," Hannah said, the words still painful to say. "She was a wonderful cook." "Well, she taught you right," Mrs. Jennings said. "Now I want you to understand something, Hannah. This is your home now for as long as you want it to be. You work hard, you're respectful, and you don't cause trouble. You've got a place here. No one's going to hurt you or take advantage of you, All right. Hannah's throat tightened. Thank you. I don't know how to repay you and Mr. Jennings for taking a chance on me. You don't need to repay us, Mrs. Jennings said firmly. You're earning your keep. But I will say that Cole went out on a limb for you yesterday, vouching for someone he'd just met. He's a good man, that one. Been with us for 3 years now, and he's one of the most reliable hands we've got. If he saw something worth helping in you, that's good enough for me. Hannah thought about Cole's steady gray eyes, the way he'd stood up to Vernon without hesitation, the gentle strength in his arms when he'd let her cry on his shoulder. He's very kind, she said softly, Mrs. Jennings gave her a knowing look but didn't comment further. Well, let me show you the rest of the house. We've got plenty to keep us busy. The days fell into a pattern after that. Hannah rose before dawn, helped Mrs. Jennings prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, cleaned and mended throughout the day, and made supper in the evening. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and she was good at it. More than that, she was appreciated for it. Mrs. Jennings praised her biscuits and her way with a needle. Mr. Jennings always thanked her for the meals, and the ranch hands were respectful and grateful. And then there was Cole. He didn't seek her out exactly, but somehow their paths crossed often. He'd come in from the range with news for Mr. Jennings and linger in the kitchen for an extra cup of coffee. He'd offer to carry the heavy wash water for her when she was doing laundry. He'd sit on the porch in the evenings and tell her stories about the horses he was training, his voice low and warm in the gathering darkness. Hannah found herself looking forward to those moments more than she wanted to admit. Cole was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that surprised her into laughter, and a way of listening that made her feel truly heard. He asked about her life before Vernon, about her mother, about her dreams for the future, and he shared pieces of his own story in return. She learned that he'd been drifting since his mother and sister died, taking work where he could find it, never staying in one place too long. The Double J was the longest he'd been anywhere since he left Colorado, and he admitted he was starting to think about putting down roots. Gets lonely, always being the stranger, he said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the desert. Nice to have folks you can count on, you know. I do know, Hannah said. She'd spent 9 years feeling like an outsider in her own home, and the warmth of belonging at the Double J was still new enough to make her marvel. 3 weeks after Hannah arrived at the ranch, Vernon finally showed up. Hannah was hanging laundry when she heard the commotion from the front of the house, raised voices, and the sound of a horse being pushed too hard. Her blood turned to ice when she recognized Vernon's slurred shout. I know she's here. That little thief stole from me, and I want her back. Hannah's hands shook so badly she dropped the sheet she'd been hanging, but before she could decide whether to run or hide, Cole appeared around the corner of the house. Stay here, he said, his voice calm but his eyes hard. I'll handle this. Cole, he's dangerous when he's drunk, Hannah warned, fear clutching at her throat. So am I, Cole said, and there was something in his face that made Hannah believe him. She watched from behind the house as Cole strode to the front yard, where Vernon had dismounted and was arguing with Mr. Jennings. Vernon looked worse than she remembered, his face red and bloated, his clothes filthy. There you are, Vernon shouted when he spotted Hannah peeking around the corner. Get over here, girl, you're coming home. She's not going anywhere, Cole said, stepping between Vernon and Hannah. She works here now. She's got a contract. Hannah didn't actually have a contract, but Vernon was too drunk to question it. Contract or not, she's my stepdaughter and she owes me, Vernon snarled. Her mother ran up debts before she died, and Hannah's going to work them off. Your stepdaughter is 21 years old, Mr. Jennings said coldly. She's got a right to work where she pleases, and I've seen no evidence of any legitimate debts. You calling me a liar?" Vernon's hand went to the gun at his hip, and Hannah's heart stopped, but Cole was faster. In one smooth motion, he had his own revolver drawn and aimed at Vernon's chest. "I'm calling you a drunk and a bully," Cole said, his voice deadly quiet. "And I'm telling you to get back on your horse and ride out of here. Miss Matthews doesn't want to see you. She doesn't owe you anything. And if you come back here making threats, you'll deal with me." Vernon stared at Cole, his hand still on his gun, and for a terrible moment Hannah thought he was actually going to draw. But then he seemed to deflate, the alcohol-fueled bravado draining out of him as he faced Cole's steady aim and Mr. Jennings's hard stare. "This ain't over," Vernon muttered, but there was no conviction in it. "Yes, it is," Mr. Jennings said. "Now get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing and threats." Vernon climbed back on his horse, shooting a last venomous look at Hannah. "Ungrateful little wretch," he spat. "Your mother would be ashamed." The words hit like a physical blow, and Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes. But before she could react, Cole spoke up, his voice ringing clear and hard. Hannah's mother would be proud to see her standing on her own 2 feet, working honest work and being treated with respect, he said. "The only one who should be ashamed here is you." Vernon had no answer for that. He wheeled his horse around and rode off in a cloud of dust, and Hannah watched him go with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Cole holstered his gun and turned to her, his expression softening. "You all right?" Hannah nodded, not trusting her voice. She wasn't all right, not really, but she was better than she would have been if she'd still been under Vernon's roof. "He won't be back," Mr. Jennings said confidently. "Vernon Matthews is a coward at heart. He only picks fights he knows he can win." But that night, as Hannah lay in bed replaying the confrontation, she couldn't shake the fear. Vernon had found her once. What if he came back? What if next time Cole and Mr. Jennings weren't there to protect her? She must have been more restless than she realized, because the next morning Cole found her in the kitchen before dawn, making bread with more force than strictly necessary. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Not really," Hannah admitted. "I keep thinking about yesterday." Cole poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the table watching her work. "You're safe here, Hannah. I meant what I said. He won't be back." "But what if he is? What if he brings friends, or what if he catches me when I'm in town?" "Then I'll be there," Cole said simply. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you." Hannah's hand stilled on the dough. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why are you doing all this for me? You barely know me." Cole was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her in the pre-dawn darkness. "Maybe I want to know you," he said finally. "Maybe I see something in you worth protecting. Or maybe I just can't stand by and watch someone suffer when I can do something about it." "It's more than that," Hannah said, her heart beating faster. "You've been so kind to me, Cole, kinder than anyone's been in years. I just don't understand what you're getting out of it." "Do I need to be getting something out of it?" Cole asked, but his voice was gentle, not defensive. "Can't I just want to see you smile? Can't I just want to know you're safe and happy?" Hannah turned to face him fully, her flour-dusted hands clasped in front of her. "Most people don't do things without a reason. Most people aren't worth knowing," Cole said. He stood and crossed to her, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool morning air. "Hannah, I'm going to be honest with you. From the moment I saw you at that cemetery, standing at your mother's grave with tears running down your face, something in my chest just ached. I wanted to help you. And then I got to know you these past few weeks, and I realized I don't just want to help you, I want to be around you. I want to hear you laugh and watch you work and listen to your stories. I want to know what makes you happy and what you dream about when you let yourself dream." Hannah stared at him, her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. "Cole, I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know you're still grieving your mother and getting used to being here. I'm not asking for anything, Hannah. I just wanted you to know why I'm doing this. It's not obligation or pity. It's because I care about you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw, and Hannah felt something shift in her chest. She'd been so focused on survival, on getting through each day, that she hadn't let herself think about what she was feeling. But now, standing in the dim kitchen with Cole looking at her like she was something precious, she couldn't avoid it anymore. She cared about him too. More than cared if she was honest with herself. She thought about him constantly, looked forward to every interaction, felt safer and happier when he was near. Was that love? She didn't know, but it was something warm and bright and terrifying. "I care about you too," she whispered. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this way about anyone. I didn't think I was allowed to." Cole's expression softened into something so tender it made her chest ache. "You're allowed to feel whatever you feel," he said. "You're allowed to be happy, Hannah. You're allowed to have a life." She stepped closer to him, closing the distance between them, and laid her flour-dusted hand on his chest. She could feel his heart beating, strong and steady. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of Vernon, of messing this up, of letting myself care and then losing you like I lost my mother." "I'm scared too," Cole said, covering her hand with his own. "But I think maybe being scared together is better than being scared alone." Hannah looked up at him, at his honest gray eyes and his kind face, and made a decision. She rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, soft and tentative and sweet. Cole froze for half a heartbeat, and then his arms came around her, pulling her close as he kissed her back with a gentleness that made her want to cry. It was nothing like she'd imagined a kiss would be. It was better, warmer, more real. It tasted like coffee and hope and the promise of something new. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day I met you," he confessed. "Then why didn't you?" Hannah asked, smiling despite herself. "Because you needed a friend more than you needed a suitor," Cole said, "and because I wanted you to be sure." "I'm sure," Hannah said, and as she said it, she realized it was true. She was sure. This man, this kind, steady, brave man, was someone she could trust. Someone she could maybe even love given time. They stood there in the kitchen, wrapped in each other's arms as the sun rose and painted the world in shades of gold. And for the first time since her mother died, Hannah felt truly, completely at peace. The months that followed were the happiest of Hannah's life. She and Cole courted properly, with Mrs. Jennings acting as a delighted chaperone and Mr. Jennings giving his gruff approval. They took walks in the desert evening, rode out to check on the cattle together, and sat on the porch talking until the stars came out. Cole was everything Vernon had never been: patient, kind, respectful. He asked Hannah's opinion and listened to her answers. He helped her when she needed it, but never made her feel weak or incapable. He made her laugh with his dry humor and held her when grief for her mother came in unexpected waves. And slowly, carefully, Hannah learned to trust in happiness again. She learned that not all men were cruel, that not all love came with conditions. She learned that she was strong and capable and worthy of good things. In September, 5 months after they met at her mother's grave, Cole asked her to marry him. They were standing by the corral, watching the horses, and he took her hand and said, "I know it hasn't been that long, but I can't imagine my life without you now. Will you marry me, Hannah?" She said yes before he'd even finished the question. They were married in October, in the small church in Sloan, with Mrs. Jennings crying happy tears and Mr. Jennings giving Hannah away. Vernon didn't show up, which was the best wedding gift Hannah could have asked for. She wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Jennings had helped her make, and Cole wore his Sunday best, and when they exchanged vows, Hannah felt her mother's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder, blessing them. Mr. Jennings gave them a small cabin on the ranch property as a wedding gift, and they spent the first year of their marriage fixing it up, making it truly theirs. Cole added a front porch where they could sit in the evenings, and Hannah planted a garden that reminded her of the one her mother used to tend. Life wasn't perfect. The work was still hard, money was still tight, and there were days when grief for her mother hit Hannah so hard she could barely breathe. But Cole was always there, steady and true, reminding her that she wasn't alone anymore. In the spring of 1884, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. She told Cole over breakfast one morning, her hands shaking with nerves and excitement, and he picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, laughing with pure joy. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, like he couldn't quite believe it. "Hannah, we're going to be parents." Their son was born in December, right as winter settled over the Nevada desert. They named him Jacob, after Cole's father, and Hannah held him in her arms and marveled at the tiny miracle they'd made. Jacob had Cole's gray eyes and Hannah's dark hair, and he was perfect in every way. Mrs. Jennings declared herself an honorary grandmother and spoiled Jacob shamelessly. Mr. Jennings carved him a little wooden horse. The ranch hands took turns bouncing him on their knees and making him laugh. Jacob was loved from his first breath, and Hannah was determined he would never know the fear and pain that had defined her own childhood. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Clara, after Hannah's mother. She was fierce from the start, crying loud and demanding attention, and Cole joked that she'd inherited her mother's strength. Hannah cried when she held Clara for the first time, thinking about how her mother would have loved to meet her grandchildren. But the tears were bittersweet rather than purely sad. Life on the ranch continued its steady rhythm. Cole was promoted to foreman, a position that came with more responsibility and better pay. Hannah continued to help Mrs. Jennings, but she also started selling her baked goods in town, building a small reputation for the best pies in southern Nevada. They saved their money carefully, dreaming of the day they might be able to buy their own land. Vernon died in 1887, falling off his horse while drunk and breaking his neck. Hannah felt nothing when she heard the news, and she didn't attend the funeral. That part of her life was closed, and she had no desire to reopen it. In 1889, when Jacob was 5 and Clara was 3, Mr. Jennings offered to sell Cole and Hannah a parcel of land on the eastern edge of the Double J property. It was 200 acres of decent grazing land with a year-round spring, and the price was more than fair. Cole and Hannah talked about it long into the night, weighing the risks and the opportunities, and in the end, they decided to take the leap. They built their own ranch slowly, carefully, adding cattle and horses a few at a time, building corrals and outbuildings as they could afford them. Cole ran the ranch while Hannah managed their growing family. Their third child, a son they named Thomas, arrived in 1890, and their fourth, another daughter named Elizabeth, came in 1893. The work was backbreaking, and there were years when they barely scraped by, when drought or disease threatened everything they'd built. But they did it together, and that made all the difference. Cole would come in from a long day of work and help Hannah with the children, and Hannah would sit up late with him planning for the future, believing in their dream even when it seemed impossible. By 1900, their ranch was thriving. They had 200 head of cattle, a dozen good horses, and a reputation for honest dealing that brought buyers from as far away as California. Their children were growing up strong and happy, loved and secure in ways that Hannah had once only dreamed of. Jacob, at 16, was already a skilled horseman, talking about expanding into horse breeding. Clara, at 14, had her mother's head for numbers and was keeping the ranch books with meticulous care. Thomas, at 10, was fascinated by the cattle and spent every spare moment learning from his father. And Elizabeth, at 7, was the wild child of the family, fearless and adventurous in a way that both terrified and delighted Hannah. On a warm evening in May of 1900, Hannah and Cole sat on the porch of the home they'd built together, watching the sun set over their land. Cole's hair was starting to gray at the temples, and Hannah had laugh lines around her eyes, but they were both healthy and strong. "Do you ever think about that day at the cemetery?" Hannah asked, leaning against Cole's shoulder. "Sometimes," Cole admitted, wrapping his arm around her. "I think about how close I came to riding past without stopping. What would have happened to you if I had?" "I don't know," Hannah said honestly, "but I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you saw me, Cole. I'm glad you cared enough to help." "Best decision I ever made," Cole said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You and me, Hannah. We built something good here." Hannah looked out at their land, at the house where her children slept safe and sound, at the life they'd created from nothing but hard work and love. She thought about her mother, about the woman who taught her to be strong even when the world tried to break her. She thought about the girl she'd been at 21, crying at a grave and believing her life was over. "We did," she agreed, lacing her fingers through Cole's. "We really did." From inside the house, they could hear Elizabeth laughing at something Jacob said, and Clara telling Thomas to stop pestering her while she worked on the books. The sounds of family, of home, of a life lived fully and with love. Cole squeezed Hannah's hand, and she squeezed back, and they sat together in the gathering darkness, grateful for every moment that had led them to this one. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their story. Jacob married a schoolteacher from town in 1905, a smart, kind woman named Sarah who fit into the family like she'd always been there. They built a house on the northern section of the ranch and started their own family, giving Hannah and Cole their first grandchildren. Clara surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to go to business college in San Francisco. Cole was hesitant at first, worried about his daughter in the big city, but Hannah convinced him to let her go. Clara thrived there, eventually returning to Nevada to help manage the business side of several ranches, including their own. She married a banker named Robert in 1908, a quiet man who adored her fierce intelligence. Thomas took over more and more of the daily operations of the ranch, as Cole's knees started to ache from decades of hard riding. He proved to have his father's steady leadership and his mother's determination, and by 1910, the ranch was larger and more successful than ever. Elizabeth, true to her wild nature, married a surveyor who traveled throughout the West, and she went with him, sending letters full of adventure from Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. Hannah worried about her youngest daughter constantly, but the letters were always full of joy, and Elizabeth always came home for Christmas, full of stories that kept the whole family entertained for hours. In 1912, on a crisp autumn evening, Hannah and Cole celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. The whole family gathered at the ranch, 3 generations now, and they roasted a steer and danced to fiddle music under the stars. Hannah, now 51 years old, danced with her husband and felt just as in love as she had at 21. 30 years, Cole marveled as they swayed together. "Feels like yesterday and forever all at once." "I know what you mean," Hannah said. She looked around at their children and grandchildren, at the land they'd built their life on, at all the evidence of a life well lived. "We did good, didn't we?" "We did better than good," Cole said firmly. "We did amazing." As the party wound down and the grandchildren were carried off to bed by their parents, Hannah found herself walking out to the small family cemetery they'd established on a hill overlooking the ranch. Her mother's body was still in the cemetery in Sloan, but Hannah had placed a marker here anyway, a way to keep her memory close. She stood in front of the simple stone marker, feeling Cole come up behind her and rest his hands on her shoulders. "Hi, Mama," Hannah said softly, like she did every time she visited this spot. "I just wanted you to know that I made it. I found my happiness, just like you wanted. I found a good man who loves me, and we built a life together. We have 4 beautiful children and 7 grandchildren so far, and they're all safe and loved and happy. I did what you asked, Mama. I was brave." Cole's arms tightened around her, and Hannah leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "She'd be so proud of you," Cole murmured. "I hope so," Hannah said. "I hope she knows that everything good in my life started that day at her grave. The worst day of my life became the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to me." They stood there for a while, watching the stars come out over the desert, and then they walked back to the house hand in hand, ready for whatever years they had left together. Cole and Hannah lived to see their golden anniversary, 50 years of marriage celebrated in 1932, with an even bigger party than their 30th. All 4 of their children were there, along with 11 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. The ranch had passed primarily to Thomas by then, but Cole still rode out most mornings to check on things, and Hannah still kept the books and baked pies that won prizes at the county fair. They were old now, their bodies marked by decades of hard work and desert sun, but they were still them. Still the cowboy who'd offered his shoulder to a grieving woman, and the woman who'd been brave enough to accept his kindness. Still partners, still best friends, still deeply, completely in love. Cole died peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1935 at the age of 78. Hannah held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart broke to lose him, she was grateful for every single day they'd had together. They buried him on the hill next to the marker for her mother, and Hannah had the stone carved with simple words: Cole Young. Beloved husband, father, and friend. He lived with honor and loved with his whole heart. Hannah lived another 3 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories about the old days and passing on her mother's recipes. She died in her sleep in June of 1938, at the age of 77, and they buried her next to Cole. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, and the story of Hannah and Cole became a treasured part of family lore. The story of how a cowboy saw a woman being beaten at her mother's grave and decided to help, and how that single act of kindness changed both their lives forever. The story of 2 people who found each other in the hardest moment and built a love that lasted a lifetime. And if you go to that ranch even now, you can still see the 3 markers on the hill. One for Clara Matthews, one for Cole Young, and one for Hannah Young, all of them together at last, overlooking the land that love built.